It was reported in Semaphore that the Jaime Harrison podcast, At Our Table, Jaime Harrison, obviously formerly the head of the DNC, this is Dems' answer to losing Joe Rogan. That's how Dave Weigel put it in Semaphore. We can put F2 on the screen. And to make matters even more satirical, if you were trying to like rip this from the pages of satire, Jaime Harrison is saying of Hunter Biden that a lot of people don't know how smart he is, don't know his background, don't know the stuff that he's worked on. They only know what either his allies or his enemies have put out there, and he's been defined by that. So, and I have to ask you, on its face, it seems ridiculous that Jaime Harrison is the answer to this, that anybody thinks that's a good answer to this. But secondly, that they think the right first guest is a sort of uncritical treatment of Hunter Biden. What did you make of the news today?
Well, let me just first say, I think it's pretty funny how people in political spaces who have no experience in broadcasting at all think it's like not a big deal to just like launch a podcast. Of course. Right. I mean, I might be the most uncharismatic, uninteresting person on the planet, but who cares? Anyone can do it. It's just laughable to me. Look, you can't manufacture a Joe Rogan. And that's what the Democratic Party is currently trying to do with Jaime Harrison, really, of all people. The reason why Joe Rogan resonates with so many people, especially young men, is because he's a real person. And whether you love him or hate him, he's pretty authentic and he means what he says. Now, I might not agree with everything he says, but at least I know it's coming from a place of sincerity. He's not someone who's bought. He's not someone who can be paid to say something he doesn't actually believe. And he's got a broad range of interests. And so that's what kind of makes his podcast as interesting as it is. I don't think that the former chair of the Democratic Party is going to resonate to the same extent that Joe Rogan does. And to your point about Hunter Biden, you know, that episode has already made some news, even though the entirety of the episode hasn't aired yet. And it's because of the fact that Hunter Biden was essentially scolding Democrats for not being, you know, sufficiently loyal to his father, who was lying to the American people about his cognitive decline. And the entirety of the Democratic establishment seemed to be in on this cover-up. Voters don't really appreciate being lied to. And so this effort to kind of rehabilitate the Biden's image or rewrite history, I think is not going to work. And more importantly, on one hand, you have members of the Democratic establishment chide Trump voters for being cult-like in their loyalty to Trump. On the other hand, in the context of this interview with Hunter Biden, basically you have this like weird commentary about like, you know, if only Democratic voters could be as loyal to their Democratic leadership as Republicans are to their leadership. No, I don't think voters should be ridiculously loyal to any politician. In a democracy, there should be accountability, including from members of your own party.
You know, one of the reasons I've admired your work for a long time is that when I was, you know, growing up and like coming of age, like late teenage years, college years, I was watching a lot of Young Turks, and it reminded me sort of what I was seeing at the same time on the right, which was the Tea Party movement. You had Occupy, you had Tea Party, and on the right, some of these new Tea Party era media outlets started to spring up. And for whatever reason, I think it took national Democrats a really long time to look at what you all were doing and say, hey, there's something here. They're connecting with audiences. And that, I wonder if they're still not doing that, because frankly, the reason that you guys resonate, and this isn't to do an apples to apples, you know, with Young Turks and right-wing media, but it is to say the reason right-wing media resonate, I think one of the reasons you guys resonate is because you're very critical of establishment Democrats. So to me, the idea that the answer to Joe Rogan would be having a former DNC chair who is not like dishing and spilling on corruption or diving into how they totally bungled the Bernie Sanders movement, or like getting Hunter Biden to talk in some detail about mistakes that he's made, but instead giving him this platform. And Jaime Harrison has intimated in the Semaphore interview, for example, that he agrees with Hunter Biden's analysis that, and of course he does, that, you know, had Democrats just doubled down on their loyalty to this ailing president, they would have been fine against Trump in 2024. I just can't imagine how frustrating it has to be to watch all of this play out and say, guys, you're completely missing the story, which is that voters don't trust you. This is not the way to rebuild the trust.
That's exactly right. And if you kind of back up and look at the full picture, and what the actual thinking of these Democratic leaders and, creatures of the Democratic establishment really think. It's this sense that the American people, their base, their voters, are really there to serve them, when in reality, these are individuals who signed up to be public servants. Like, I'm sorry, I have enough trouble focusing on my own career. It is not my job to build a politician's career, but that's the way they behave. They feel that we as voters owe it to them to build them up, even when they're lying to us in our faces. And so for me, I don't know if this speaks poorly of me, and I don't really care, but I have no loyalty to any politician.
Right.
You either do things I like or you do things I don't like, and I'm going to speak out about it regardless. And that goes for politicians that I generally like. I generally like Bernie Sanders. Some of what he said following October 7th in Israel, I didn't agree with. He eventually came around, but it took him a while to see what Israel was really up to in Gaza, for instance. But I'm willing to speak out about things like that, even though on the whole, I see Bernie Sanders as one of the better politicians in Congress. But if you don't have accountability, if you don't have an electorate that, doesn't consist of partisan hacks who just root for their team because it's their team, if you have voters who don't want to engage in any accountability for their own side, well, we're going to find ourselves in the situation that we're currently in, if you ask me. I think election after election, we're usually presented with two terrible choices. And it's because if you just cheer for a team and you don't really care about anything else, you're going to create an environment of subpar politicians who are more interested in their political careers, more interested in serving their donors as opposed to serving their constituents. And we're seeing that across the board. Democrats, Republicans, they both have low approval ratings right now, and that's for good reason.
And that's the core of what was happening simultaneously, I think, during Occupy and the Tea Party movement that so many people just didn't put together. And one of the people who did was Donald Trump. He sort of heard something similar, I think, from both movements, whether it was conscious or otherwise. And Dave Weigel from Semaphore notes that his line about Joe Rogan was a joke. But to Jaime Harrison, it's not. Jaime Harrison, clearly thinks that this is some type of serious competitive product to make Democrats compete in the podcast space. In the meantime, maybe they should be actually even more introspective, which they seem to have zero interest in doing, because let's go ahead and roll this shot of Harry Enton talking about Dems actually lagging from where they were in the 2018 midterms when they picked up seats. We can take a look here.
The bottom line is this: Democrats are behind their 2006 and 2018 paces when it comes to the generic congressional ballot. What are we talking about here? All right, the Democrats versus the Republicans on the generic congressional ballot, the margins. Look at where we are now. Democrats are ahead, but by just 2 points. Look at where Democrats were already ahead by in 2017. They were behind by 7 points. How about 2005 on the generic congressional ballot? Ahead by 7 points, ahead by 7 points, and now they're only ahead by 2 points. Their lead is less than half of where it was in either 2017 or 2005 in July of those years, the year before the midterm election. Yes, Donald Trump may be unpopular, but Democrats have not come anywhere close to sealing the deal at this particular point.
Here in Washington, D.C., you could practically sense the giddiness among Democrats when Donald Trump and Republicans passed the, quote, one big, beautiful bill, because it did pay for tax cuts to the rich, partially by cuts to Medicaid. And Democrats saw that as a significant political gift, and all kinds of other sort of things that were stuffed in it as political gifts. So what explains these numbers as of right now?
Well, I think that Democrats aren't enjoying high approval ratings yet, because enough time hasn't passed where voters forget about the pretty gross games that were played by the DNC, the Biden campaign, all of that leading up to the 2024 presidential election. But what the whole of the Democratic Party seems to have done so far in Trump's second term is take James Carville's advice to heart. And his advice was, play dead, do nothing, just let the Trump administration hang itself. Which, look, if all you care about is allowing the pendulum swing to go from Trump right back to ineffective, pathetic Democrats, okay, great. I guess we have that to look forward to. I don't really care about that, though. I don't care about Democrats winning. I care about the right Democrats winning. Democrats that actually stand for something, want to fight for their constituents, and, engage in necessary reforms. And if you remember, this omnibus bill, yeah, you're right, is actually pretty unpopular with the electorate. Polling indicates that most people are not in favor of losing, funding to Medicaid and SNAP, food assistance for the needy, in order to pay for tax cuts for the rich. But at the same time, when Biden came into office, he had promised all sorts of things. Oh, I'm going to get the corporate tax rate back up to 28%. No. Trump cut it from 35% to 21%. Biden's starting offer was 28%. And by the way, he didn't even accomplish that. So can I curse? I don't know if I can.
Please.
Okay.
You must. It's a necessity.
So Democratic establishment candidates are full of shit. And I need people to understand that. And we need to get out of this vicious pendulum swing cycle where we go from one terrible administration to another terrible administration. They just have different branding. But in the end, they do nothing for ordinary people. And that's what people are hungry for. I think that's part of what explains the popularity of Zohran Mamdani in this mayoral race in New York City. He's running as a Democrat, but he's very different in his messaging compared to other establishment Democrat candidates.
It's funny you say that. I was just going to ask you whether you think that partially explains the success of Zohran Mamdani, because he was up against this perfect foil in Andrew Cuomo. I mean, you couldn't have almost a more perfect foil in Andrew Cuomo. And that's a good, I think, point also to bring in this clip of Gavin Newsom going on the Shawn Ryan show. Newsom, I'm really curious what you think about this, Anna, strikes me as someone who is smart enough to know where the winds are blowing, but not honest enough to sort of pull off the strategy. He knows what the strategy should be, but he can't quite execute on it because he is such a career politician whose driving force is power and ambition rather than any sort of first principle. So we can go ahead and roll S3 here. This is Gavin Newsom on the Shawn Ryan show, which is obviously very popular with the right.
About people being outside even. And we realized then, after the fact, what the hell are we doing shutting down the beaches and open areas and not understanding that early on. And so I think that of all issues, looking back, I remember Florida, there was a big issue too, even there.
He's so cool and relatable in his genes. And between Cuomo and Newsom, these are actually two really good examples of people who represent the Democratic Party establishment who have not fully reckoned with their unpopularity during the COVID crisis and are now sort of trying to be, as powerful as they were before without, I don't know, maybe actually even being seriously introspective as opposed to whatever the hell that was.
You're absolutely right, okay, in your analysis. And let me just say, that I like you when I'm willing to sit through a podcast episode featuring Gavin Newsom just to prepare for this. Okay,
God bless.
I can't stand him. I can't stand his raspy voice. And it's not for any superficial reason other than the fact that I live in California. I've had the displeasure of experiencing what his leadership actually looks like. He's a snake oil salesman. He's a terrible person. Look into the campfire. Look into PG&E, one of his major donors, and how he shafted Californians who lost everything as a result of PG&E, refusing to upgrade their 100-year-old equipment, including a $10 hook that was suspending electrical lines. Yeah, that hook finally just gave out. Electrical lines fall onto dry brush, and that caused one of the most devastating fires in California's history. There are people who lost their homes who are currently still living in these RVs or trailers parked on their land, hoping to rebuild. But it's insanely expensive to do that. And they're still not getting the settlement money that they're entitled to. He's just a really bad person. On the Shawn Ryan show, one of the other things that Newsom said that I really want to just mention, he was doing this faux taking responsibility and ownership thing. And I can see right through it because he lies even in that context. So for instance, he was like, I really did something terrible. I got caught having dinner for my friend's birthday at the French Laundry when I told people, don't get together with your family for the holidays and whatever because of COVID. No, Newsom. You didn't get together for your friend's birthday That was a meeting with your donors at the French Laundry. He's a liar. He's a snake oil salesman. So like, if there are any Democrats watching this right now and they had hope in Gavin Newsom, I'm sorry that I'm telling you things that are making you upset and angry. But take a look at my state. Take a look at the homelessness. Take a look at the fact that $24 billion that were allocated to help the homeless, nowhere to be found, gone. That's taxpayer money, gone. Okay. The drug epidemic, overdose epidemic. I mean, things have fallen apart in this state. He's starting to finally take his role as the governor seriously, and things have gotten like a tiny bit better. But make no mistake about it, California went from being one of the best states that has, just a tremendous amount of resources, natural resources, industries that were doing really, really well. All of that has been decimated due to the terrible decisions that he made as the leader of this state. And I just, honestly, I cringe at the idea of him winning a Democratic primary to become president of the United States. Gavin Newsom cares about one thing and one thing only, and that's Gavin Newsom, period.